Hey, this is Don from Padlock Technologies again. I am going to do a quick FMC or Secure Firewall Management Center tour. Now, I've created this lab a long time ago. This is some of the stuff I did for a lot of customers. I still do it now. And I do POVs for, if you're a Cisco rep trying to do a bake-off between Palo and Fortinet and Secure Firewall and want to do POVs, this is the kind of stuff I do. So I want to go ahead and share with you what I can do, and just so you can see the whole FMC platform for those that are trying to learn the FMC. I'm going to do a deep dive into some of the concepts here, but this is just going to be an intro to the FMC so you can see what it looks like. Now, I want to preface this by saying this is the new hotness. Like, this is 7.6, which I don't even think it's gold star yet. So I'm going to just go in here and show you what it looks like, show you some things, look around, and later videos I'll start going into a lot more deeper concepts. So let's first go and log into here. Now, I did configure the SSO, but I don't really feel like using that right now. So when I get into SSO, I'll start talking about that. So this is the FMC. Now, for those of you guys who have the older FMC or the older, I think like 7.4 maybe, you might not have this dashboard. Like I said, this is the new hotness. So you're not going to get this dashboard. This is kind of a unified dashboard. If I showed you SD-WAN, kind of looks like this. I think Catalyst Center kind of has the same look. So this is basically brand new stuff. So when you log into FMC, you're going to be greeted by this screen. This is your summary dashboard. This is kind of a summary of everything it's seen. So as you see unique applications, top web applications seen, the top clients that are seen, our client applications that are seen, some traffic scores based by risk. You can see some business relevancy, what kind of operating system it sees as it's going through, or if traffic is going through the firewall. Application categories, some of this traffic by user. That data would be filled out if I had like user integration, which I actually do have user integration on here, but I don't have any of the machines turned on, so none of that's going to show up. Stuff by reputation category. This is the first screen, right? If you had threats, if you had any threats, any incident of compromise is what they call it, you would see data in here. Now, if you don't have incident of compromises, you don't really have to worry about this. Not seeing any data in here is not really a bad thing. This would mean something's going on in your network if you see threats here. Intrusion events. If you had some type of intrusion event, you would see all that data here, right? If you don't have it, you're not going to see it, right? So again, if you don't see it, it's not a bad thing. And this is where you can, if you hit this down arrow here, you can kind of go and look at more detail. But I don't have anything, so you're not going to see it. The status here is the status of the FMC itself, or the SMC itself. That's going to come up and give you a bunch of data. As you can see, 7.60. That's what I have. It shows who's currently in there. QoS, geolocation, zero trust. Now, this zero trust thing is if you created a zero trust rule. If you created a zero trust rule, you would see like who's accessing accessing an application based on the zero trust policy. Zero trust policy is kind of something new in 7.60. It may now be in 7.42. It may be there, but in 7.60, this is one of the major features here. Now, if you hit this switch dashboard, you get a whole bunch of other dashboards here. Now, the main dashboard I'm going to go to a couple of these. So the application status dashboard is where you're going to get a little bit more of some detailed into what kind of applications are, going through the firewall, like stuff that's being denied. You can see this stuff is being denied. Stuff that's being allowed, basically DNS, HTTPS, stuff like that, NTP, and this is because my internet rule is very locked down, so I don't allow a lot of stuff. Traffic by application. Now, intrusion event, if you saw some intrusion event, again, you would see it showing up in here based on the connection stuff. And then this encryption visibility engine, which is Eve, is if you have Eve turned on, you would see that data in here. Right now, I had it turned on, but I think there's something going on with the FMC from VM perspective, because this was showing data at one point and then it just stopped showing data for some reason. And I think it's because the VM, I turned it off, and I turned it off, and since I'm using very little resources, it's kind of messing up the reporting. But Eve is turned on, and I'll show you that in the application, or the APC, which is the access control policy. But if you did have Eve on, you would see this data here, and Eve is basically what applications did I see going across the network, right? Then you have your connection summary. Now, your connection summary is going to be a lot more detailed, right? So you look at your connections over time. This stuff here, connection by the initiator. The initiator is who actually is sending the traffic. Responder is who's receiving the traffic, or who's receiving the traffic on the other end. The initiator is who is sending the traffic. You kind of see the traffic by ports. You can see the applications that's going through. This connection summary dashboard, if you really want to see your traffic, you should go to the unified events. Unified events pretty much shows you everything, right? And I'll show you what unified events are. So the same thing here, you go to traffic, it's kind of telling you what that is. Geolocation. So this is going to tell you if there's data coming through this, where the connections are going to. All right. So this might take a little time to show up. If anything shows up. Yeah, there's nothing here that's showing up right now. Source continent, yeah. So don't worry about this too much. Again, this was showing some information here, but I just turned this on, so this needs time to come back for it to show actual data here. SSL stuff. If you're doing SSL decryption, it will show statistics on SSL decryption over time. SSL certificate, the SSL action if something is being dropped. As you can see, the status is valid here. There's no SSL decryption over time. I didn't see anything over the last hour. No failures, no errors over time. And then you got some stuff that's like do not decrypt. Now, this do not decrypt action is probably coming off of my SSL decryption rule, because that's hitting a lot. URL filtering, I did not have this actually configured in any of my ACP rules. So I'm not really doing any URL filtering here. So you're not going to really see data here. But this is how you would navigate this dashboard, like navigate the connection dashboard. Then we got some detailed dashboards, which is basically, this is just back to the FMC kind of stuff. It's a lot of dashboards that are redundant. So you just got to know where to look at, all right? Then you have your file dashboard. This is for your malware events, file events, if you're doing any downloading or anything like that. Any transfers through the FMC, which I'm currently not doing, you will see that information here. You'll see that transfer here as long as the FTD can see the traffic. If it's SSL traffic, unless you're doing decryption between a certain zone or something like that, then chances are you're not going to see that data, right? Host receiving malware. Let's see, we got a threat score here. This is probably going to be Windows updates. They always mark it as an issue. So if we click in here just a little bit more and get some more detail. Let's see what we got. Yeah, so this looks like it's a executable. So you see MS-EXE. So this is an executable file. And then let me see if I view the table here. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, so I'm not doing any storage. Dynamic analysis was complete. There was no local analysis. But these are what they call the hash 256. So this is where you get your disposition from. So everything that a disposition is basically a hash value. If it goes up to dynamic analysis, it takes a 256 hash or SHA-256 hash of the file, and then it goes up to Talos to get checked, see what it is, and then the disposition got to come back and say, hey, is this malware or not, right? And if this is where your retroactive capabilities come from as well. So you could technically, if a file did go through and then dynamic analysis came later and said, hey, that's malware, well then if you had like secure endpoints, it'll say, hey, this is malware. We want to block this everywhere. And then everywhere it's been, we'll now try to quarantine it or block it. This is where the whole concept of network as a sensor comes through. Because if something comes into a different firewall, it's seen by another firewall as bad. Once you lock it down, everything that's connected or integrated in your account, in your ecosystem, so to speak, it will know about that bad file, and it will already have a rule to block that file when it sees it based on the fact that another sensor saw it. So again, this is that sensor as a network as a sensor concept. And we're going to get deep into that as well from it. Now, if I go to the analyst, you can see this is where a lot more stuff is here, right? You get a lot more events. So if we went to file events, right now you don't see anything here. Now, usually you have to do table view of file events, because file summary, it just gives you a summary or something, right? Nothing's there, but you can see you get a lot more detail when you go to the table events, right? Network trajectory. So this is network trajectory is if the FTD seen something and say a recent malware or recent file was downloaded or something like that, you can actually click on that hash and it will show you where that file has gone through or the points that file was seen. Now, you're not going to see any of this stuff unless you got integration with Cisco secure endpoints. You can only see it go through the firewall, and it'll say, hey, I saw it here. But then without that other telemetry data from, your integrations with Cisco secure endpoints, you're not going to be able to see exactly the trajectory of that file. So where did it go? If it, duplicated itself and went somewhere else, all that kind of stuff that your cybersecurity team would need when they're trying to trace what happened, or how this piece of malware kind of went all over the place. So unified events is where you're going to work through the most. Unified events is basically a lot of events in one. So your unified events will basically show you, if I click down on this will basically show you, okay, source IP. This is my VAs for secure access, by the way. This source was reaching out to this destination for HTTP. It'll tell me the access policy, or ACP I was using, and then the actual ACE in that ACP, and then what device it went to. So this kind of gives you everything you need to know. Now, obviously, you see this thing called SGT. Source SGT is umbrella VAs. That's because I have integration with ICE. And the only way that's new about it is because I'm integrating my FMC with ICE. That's why it knows about the SGTs that I specifically made for the VAs here. As you can see, it's going to umbrella here. And then it's telling you where's ingress. So it came in on the LAN interface. Then it went to egress WAN 1. Now this ingress virtual router, egress virtual router, global. This is the global routing table. This is GRT. If I did do a separate VRF, I would have to leak between the two. And then you would see ingress VRF something, egress VRF this, if I was doing that. Then it tells you, the device, again, do not decrypt, stuff like that, because my SSL rule is here. So this gives you a lot of information that it's unified, that I don't have to go looking around all over the place for. I can kind of just look at this unified event and say, okay, I see it did all of this. And then if you wanted to, you can go to this search button. And if I wanted to do device, let's just say device, and I just want to see traffic going through DCFW INET. Just apply it. These are all the connections that are going through that one firewall, as you can see here, device. That one firewall. Now, I have more than one firewall in here, but that was quick and brief how to just go in here and say, okay, what is going through all of this? Or what's going through this one firewall? Now, there's a troubleshooting tab as well, if you wanted to do that. You see some troubleshooting stuff, user authentication critical. I don't have, I'm not, I have I have already VPN load balancing set up here. And I did a video about VPN load balancing that I'll get into in another video now that I have this lab back up and running. So here's from a policy perspective. So from a policy perspective, you got all of these policies that you can technically configure. Now, I'm gonna go through these in later videos, but the access control policy is the main policy here. So if I click here, here's the access control policies that I've created. I have a bunch of them now. In 760, you can create a ACP template, and you can actually do zero touch provisioning with firewalls now. So you can create a whole template, assign all this stuff to templates, and then push it to firewalls once they get to the manager. Once you configure at least the manager, push the template out, boom, this saves you a whole lot of time configuring stuff manually. You just push out the template. Now, the next question you're probably going to ask me is, why is there ACP base and then there's two policies underneath it? Now, this is a nested policy or a parent-child policy concept. So what the base policy would have, if I click on my base policy, that will have things, you know, generic. I'm allowed trust rule, trust rule, trust rule. This is my default internet rule with malware and IPS. But this trust rule is saying, hey, if it's Office 365, trust it. If it's, you know, web conferencing software, trust it. If it's video conference, trust it. And these are the applications. Now, these are application filters that I had to create for this rule to work. This base policy now will be the base for the next two internet firewalls. So basically those rules will get copied over to both of these policies, right? So this allows you to create a policy that's, you know, if it applies to every firewall, like the rules that you see me just did with Office 365, web conferencing, video conferencing, well, I don't want to have to recreate that rule in every ACP rule. So you create a base policy with your base stuff, and then you attach the child policy to it, which will copy it over. So let's say we go over to DC1 policy. And as you can see, the mandatory policy has my base policies in it. And then it has FTP server policy in it. That's not, this is a part of the child policy. This is, as you can see, it says ACP base. So it copied the base policy over. And then from here, you see a copy from ACP base. So I don't have to recreate my internet rule because it's coming off the base policy. The only one that's technically specific to this firewall is this one here, any FTP server. Now, usually I wouldn't, you know, any FTP server I probably wouldn't do. I'm just doing this for, you know, demonstration purposes. But this is the rule that's pretty much to this firewall only. Now, I am doing SSL decryption, but that is in the base policy. So if I look at the base policy, the SSL decryption, and this is outbound encryption, not inbound encryption, is configured here. So it automatically takes over this SSL decryption policy. Now, that's the main policy. And as you can see at the top, this is where you add the other features to it, right? Identity policy, which is your AD groups. Your security intelligence is your DNS stuff, which is your local DNS policy. And then if you have an umbrella on the back end, you can also say, hey, if it passes my local DNS policy, check umbrella to make sure that it passed that policy. And if it doesn't pass that policy, drop it. So you got DNS protection there. Pre-filter rule. I just had a video about pre-filter rules. Pre-filter rules are going to happen before any of this is even evaluated. So again, ACPs are the main container and everything else gets attached to it, right? You got your ACEs in it, but your, you know, other policies get attached to the ACP, like malware, IPS, SSL decryption, identity policy, pre-filter rule. All that stuff gets attached to the ACP. You can't do anything without an ACP, in the firewall at least. So that was the ACP. Intrusion policy, same thing. This gets attached to the ACP. There's two components to this. There's the IPS policy, or you can do IDS, but I don't know why anybody would do IDS. And then there's the network analyst, the NAP, which is basically how the intrusion policy is going to flatten or interpret traffic. So you can go in here and say FTP, let's say, you know, FTP is 2021, right? What if you change it to 2020 and 2121? Well, you need to go in here in the NAP and tell it that FTP are those ports, excuse me, or your IPS won't function correctly because it's looking for a port that technically you're not sending FTP on. So you have to configure this and the IPS policy. Malware policy is pretty much the same. I did configure one. We will get into this a little later about the malware policy and certain things you need to look out for when you configure it. DNS policy, again, is you have two policies, default DNS policy and umbrella policy. Default DNS policy happens first, and then DNS is checked second. If one, and the umbrella will override the local DNS policy. If you allow it local DNS, but umbrella says it's bad, it'll block it. Identity policy, that is your users and groups. So if I'm going to show you what this actually looks like when I show you integration. So when you do your integration and you're looking for users and groups, you're going to do this identity policy to say, hey, where do you want me to identify users from? And usually this is just set to any, and then passes authentication, because I have this integrated with ICE and I have this integrated with AD. It basically does domain join like LDAP stuff, but I have that integrated with AD. So if someone logs into AD, it sends that information over to ICE, and then I can use those AD groups and policies. Decryption policy. This is your SSL policy. Now there's two types of decryption policies. There's an outbound decryption policy, and then there's an inbound decryption policy. Now if we go into this, let's see what we got here. If we go into this, I pretty much have a bunch of do not decrypts. Yeah, I got a bunch of do not decrypts, and then I have a decrypt and resign. Now, the decrypt and resign stuff, that's outbound. A lot of this other stuff is do not decrypt, especially with the certain categories you can't decrypt for, law purposes. Don't want to get in trouble for that. But yeah, this decrypt and resign is basically, it's going to do the man in the middle attack. So it's going to go out there, decrypt the packet, recrypt the packet, and resign it with the key that, since you don't own the key, it's just going to re-sign it. So when you go look at something and you look at the certificate, it's going to say signed by, I think I have this as ssldecrypt.plt.com. So that's what you'll see when you go to a site that's SSL related. Pre-filter rules, I talked about that before. So the pre-filter rule is what happens before the ACP. And if you look at my last video, as you can see, this pre-filter rule here says anything going to any two umbrellas. So I pretty much have LAN to WAN, that's what it's coming into. And then I say if any source, I could have just did the umbrella VAs, but I just did any for demonstration. Going to open DNS, we're going to fast path that. The fast path rule, again, like I was saying before, is bypass any inspection, just go in the ingress and go out of the egress. Do not do any inspection whatsoever. And then you have your tunnel rule and your pre-filter rule. So if I click tunnel rule, as you can see, this is going to be the tunnel. The objects are the interface where it's coming in, and the tunnel endpoints, and then what kind of encapsulation is doing. So if someone was doing GRE or IP and IP, stuff like that, that's your traditional tunnel. If they were doing any of this stuff, you can have three options. You can analyze it, you can block it, you can fast path it. Most of the time, you're just going to fast path it because you don't want to try to break the tunnel based on trying to analyze it. Analyze it just sends it to the ACP, like I said before. And then the pre-filter rule is non-encrypted traffic, and you can pick the ports, same three actions: analyze, block, fast path. Most people are going to use this for fast path and stuff that, for some reason IPS is breaking it or snort is causing an issue. They'll fast path it just to let the traffic go through. Zero Trust application. This is new to the FTD 7.6. I did not configure this yet, but this is basically, if this is ZTNA on the local box. Now, if you want to really do ZTNA, usually you're going to do this for people that's trying to get from the outside world into a resource internally. I would probably skip this and just go to Cisco Secure Access. It's a lot seamless there, It's not that hard to configure. As long as you got the backhaul tunnel or a resource connector, you can pretty much do ZTNA for people that's on the outside and they have to log in. You can use, Microsoft, or you can use Duo Security, and then do ZTNA that way. Here, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things you got to configure, and it's not as intuitive as Cisco Secure Access. So, once I get my Cisco Secure Access platform, I can kind of demonstrate that for you in Cisco Secure Access, what that looks like. But this here, I may configure this and come back later and show you what it is in another video. But this is not as intuitive as you think it is on this device, locally on the device. Network discovery rules. This is how this kind of matches your identity policy. All right, you want to discover everything that comes through the packet and stuff like that. Usually we just do discover host, user application, and any direction. You could come in here and mess with it, but anything you change in here, it changes it on all the firewalls. So you just got to be careful. Application detectors, people don't really use that too much. Instance, this is RTC. So I'll click on this to show you what RTC kind of looks like. I already configured it. So this is by PS Grid ACN policies are RTC. So what this actually looks like, if I go in here, these A and C policies are actually coming from ICE itself. I configured them on ICE and did the PS Grid integration. So now I can do this thing called RTC. And that maps to a correlation rule. So I have two correlation rules in here. One is a traffic rule. One is a malware rule. So if we go to rule management, I got two rules here. RTC bad countries, RTC malware events. So basically what this says is, if for some reason, and I'm not blocking it, a user tries to go to a destination that I consider as a bad country, it will send a trigger to ICE to say reauth this user session with a certain tag on it. And I think I did shutdown on this. Now in ICE, I created a policy that says, hey, if something gets reauth and you see this tag of shutdown, where you're going to reauth them and then you're going to push a DACL to their port that denies IPv6 and IPv4. So it's going to kick them off the network immediately. Same thing here with malware events. Now, I didn't create a quarantine VLAN in my lab, so I just gave it the same thing. Like, hey, if you see quarantine, you're just going to deny, IPv6 and IPv4. That's really all this is. All right. And then from policy management, you pretty much combine those together, you turn it on. So that's RTC in a nutshell, what that looks like. I will deep dive into that later. I just wanted to give you a quick view of what that looks like from a configuration standpoint. You can do traffic profiling. This takes a while to do. That's why nobody really does this on the firewall, because you have to create a profile, then you have to let it see it go through and do a baseline on whatever the profile is. That can take some time. So most people don't really do this. And then you can create a RTC that says, hey, if you're outside this baseline for some reason, do this. So devices. Devices is where you can do a little bit more stuff. So device management is where you're going to see the most of your devices that you actually got hooked into your FMC. Template management is where you're going to actually create a template. This is new in 7.6.0. NAT is where you're going to do NAT rules. QoS is where you're going to do QoS policies. QoS is a policer. It is not a shaper. So you can't shape the traffic and, slow it down or time it down so it can meet your CRT from your CIR. I don't even know how I said that. CIR, your committed information rate from the service provider. Platform settings is where you're going to set like local settings for DNS, AAA authentication, SNMP, SMTP. What else is there? There's a lot of stuff that you can do in platform settings. Flex config. Flex config. So flex configs are a way to hack the device or hack the FTD to do something that is not natively supported in the GUI. For instance, when you are doing VPN load balancing, you have to create 3 DNS entries locally on the box, one for firewall 1, one for firewall 2, one for the VIP. All right. In my example, I have something that says vpn1.plt.com. The second box is vpn2.plt.com. And then the VIP is vpn.plt.com. And when someone goes to vpn.plt.com, they will either go to the master FTD, or they will get bounced to the secondary or the slave FTD, and that RA VPN session will be there. Now, I don't think I created that flex config yet. Yeah, I haven't created that flex config policy yet, so I'll have to do that when I start talking about VPN load balancing. Certificates is where you're going to add the certificates to the FTDs. As you can see, this is what I've already added here. So I kind of started doing the VPN load balance. I just didn't do the flex config part yet. These are PKCS12 files. This is pretty much the easiest way to do it. What that is basically the certificate, the CA, and the key in one file, and then you just upload it. That's the more preferred method to do certificates on the FTD and FFC platform. What else is there? Site-to-site, obviously how to create site-to-site VPN. You can also create your SASE topology, which is if you hook this into like Secure Access or Umbrella, if you're still doing that. You can hook that in through SASE. I'll just click it here. If I hit add, as you see, the new hotness. SASE topology, because I didn't hook it into the Umbrella, it's grayed out. But once I hook it in with API keys to Umbrella, this would be the new one, and it will auto create the tunnel to Umbrella or Secure Access. If you want to do Secure Access, you're going to do route-based VPN. This one is still hooking into Umbrella right now, so you can't really automatically do SASE topology like you can do with Umbrella, with Secure Access. You can't do that yet. Of course, this is telling me I don't have packets because I'm not using that interface yet. So troubleshooting, this is where you do all your troubleshooting stuff. File downloads, CLI. CLI is pretty primitive. You can only do 3 commands there. Packet tracers, packet captures, snort profiling. Most people don't do that. And then you have your upgrade, how you can do upgrades of the FMC and the FTDs. Remote access is basically your RVPN. DAP, nobody really uses anymore. But because you can do posturing and do all this, you don't really need to do dynamic access policies. But you know, some people do and some people don't. I've never had to create this. Remote access is how you would do our traditional RA VPNs. And this is also how you would do VPN load balancing. I'll get into that once we start talking about VPN load balancing. But let's take a look at devices. So this is basically your devices, right? This is everything that I got hooked in right now. So as you can see, I have my VPN firewalls. I have my internet firewall for HQs. I have my data center firewall. I have an MB firewall in the MB data center because this is actually behind some SD-WAN stuff. So let me log into this and actually show you what this looks like, what the lab actually looks like here. So this is the lab. It's a lot of stuff here. I haven't gotten a stealth watch yet. I haven't turned that on yet. I already configured it, but that'll be another video for later. Here's the ICE nodes. This is my FMC. The FMC that you're actually looking at right now is right here. These are the VPN firewalls. This is the internet firewall. This is the DC firewall that you saw. This is the MB firewalls over here. Technically, these are in a, this is SD-WAN all over the place. These routers here, SD-WAN, 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 and then my SD-WAN deployment is down here, and then this multi-tenant SD-WAN. So I actually have 2 tenants in one SD-WAN deployment, and they're completely separated. I'll get into that when I start talking about SD-WAN. So that's what it looks like. So that's why they're not turned on, or you don't see them because they're not turned on. And I also have a Singapore. This is a FTD in transparent mode, and that is I'm able to connect to that through Secure Access. Actually, Secure Access, if you didn't know, you can use as a backup site-to-site tunneling mechanism. Like you can literally do BGP, and then those prefixes will be seen in SD-WAN, and then you can do site-to-site tunneling through not SD-WAN, through secure access. You can actually do tunneling through secure access. As you can see, got the secure access routers down here. Again, I need to get my what's the name first. I need to get my console first before I can actually show you what that looks like. All right, so this is basically the dashboard. Now, this is where you're going to do majority of your routing. So let's say we go to iNet here, and this is the interfaces here, and my interface groups. I'll explain what interface groups are later. Routing is going to obviously be your routing stuff. Now, here's the thing where I talk about ECMP. I have ECMP currently right here. That's basically allowing me to use both of these WANs as one. Both of these interfaces are one, right? And I did this on the internet firewall. So technically, internet can go out of 1 or 2, doesn't really matter. I'm actually doing ECMP, equal cost multipathing, which is allowing me to use multiple. If I had 10 connections, I can all put them in one bonded link from a logical perspective, and going out whatever link they want at that point. Since I'm doing high availability, these are the high availability configurations. Now, I usually you can use one link for both. Just know that if anything from the stateful link, as is replicating stateful information, if anything causes a hiccup with the failover, you can have random failovers for no reason. That's why I kind of keep it at 2 and not 1. Summary. This is the summary of your devices here. These are some new things down here. Application bypass. I'll explain what application bypass is. It has something to do with elephant flows. And then the deployment rollback is probably one of the best features here. So basically what this, and this is on 7.4.2 as well. What this does is say, hey, if you make a mistake, push a configuration, and you lose connectivity to the FTD, it's going to roll back in 20 minutes. Now you can determine how long or how short that is. By default, I think it's 20 minutes. DHCP, I'm not doing DHCP on this. VTEP is if you're doing something with VXLAN, but I'm not doing any of that. So objects, this is where you configure everything from an object perspective, right? Everything's an object in FTD LAN and FMC LAN. Everything's an object. Address pools, you know, BFD templates if you want to do that. Flex configurations. Networks, interfaces where you can create your interface groups and stuff like that. Security zones. PKI is where you're going to do your certificates. Remember that certificate I showed you in the RA VPN? Here's the certificate right here. But you also got to make sure you trust certificates. So if you're going to do something like SSL decryption with your internal certificate, which is going to be a sub CA certificate that you're going to use, you have to make sure you trust the root CA that signed it. So if I go to internal certs, where is that at? That's my PX Grid cert right there. And this is how I'm doing the PX Grid integration. And that's my internal CAs. This is my SSL decryption cert. This is what I use to actually decrypt traffic. And as you can see, decrypt.plt.com is what I will see in a browser if I go to, you know, I go through this, through one of my firewalls, or internet firewalls, to go out to the internet and go to some HTTPS site. It will decrypt it, and that's what you would see it signed by. Ports, route maps, prefix lists is if you're going to do something like BGP on the firewall. Syncholon is a technique that kind of helps you find out if something is compromised, because you can say, hey, if someone's trying to go to this and it works with your DNS policy, if someone's trying to go to like a bad DNS and you set it to a sinkhole address, and you look into your logs and you see something that's trying to constantly go to the sinkhole address, you know that's been compromised because it's going to a bad site and trying to ping it or trying to get to it from a DNS perspective. SLL monitor, that's your traditional WAN failover. Time range stuff, this is if you want to create rules in a specific time range. Rarely does anybody use this, but it's a feature. URL variable sets are for, you know, IPS. I have a bunch of variable sets because you need to actually adjust your variable sets. This is one of the things that I see all the time in my audits or assessments, is people use the default variable set, and I'm like, that the default variable set just matches anything. It's not specific to your environment. So your IPS is kind of not functioning the way it should. because you're matching everything. Even outside addresses are technically home net addresses. So that's stuff you need to change. Variables, if you want to use variables, you can do that there. And then all your VPN stuff is down here. So your phase 1, phase 2s, your group policies for RA VPNs, your secure client files, all that stuff is here. Integrations. So I'm going to do one integrate. I'll show you 2 integrations, and that's really it. So AMP, if you don't have AMP for endpoints, you would do it here, then connect your AMP for endpoints, and then that's when you see that integration of, hey, network as a sensor. If I see something bad on a firewall, I'm going to notify all my secure endpoint clients that this thing is bad, this SHA-256 hash is bad. If you ever see this come across, block it, quarantine it, whatever. So let's go with the integrations here. So I don't have anything integrated here yet because I just did this. Realms are your AD groups. So if I were to look in here, and let's just go in here real quick. As you can see, these are all my AD groups here that I pulled. So if I wanted to do a policy based on AD groups, I could. And then there's ICE. This is pretty much my ICE configurations. This is how I get the SGTs. I got this passive identity agent, but I'm rarely going to use that. I'll just do traditional PX grid integration. Now, the important part of this integration is very important once you start using SGTs, because if this link or connection is bad, you will have a bad day in the office, because then you won't get the updated SGT to IP mappings or IP to SGT mappings. High availability, I did not configure this. Again, you only seen one FMC. If I had 2, I would configure high availability. And this is where you can have management even in the event of your primary FMC going down. You just switch over to the secondary, and then you continue managing your boxes like nothing ever happened. eStream don't use, host endpoint clients don't really use, Smart Manager on-prem don't really use that much. That's already by default, just connect. I think that is really it. Yeah, all the rest of this stuff, this is health monitor stuff. This is tools and backup configuration. This is configurations of the FMC as a whole. Now, I don't think I did remote storage here yet. So this remote storage is another thing that I catch people on audits on. Yeah, anything you do local, you don't want to do that, because here's the thing. Local storage will fill up your FMC depending on how much disk space you have. And then it can stop you from upgrading your FMC. And then it reboots in the middle of an upgrade, and then you see a big white screen on the board, and you don't know what went on. And it's because your upgrade paused because you don't have enough space. So I always recommend people go and do one of these remote storages, and then by default, it will just send all your backups to that remote storage. So that was the brief tour of the FMC, or Secure Firewall Management Center. Hopefully, it was a lot of information, a lot of data. I will go back and create sub-videos on more specific topics related to the FMC and the firewall, that whole architecture and how that works. If you got any more questions about this, please put them in the comments, or you can send me an email at questions@padlocktech.com. Again, it's questions@padlocktech.com. Hopefully this video was informative. Don't forget to share, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. Have a nice day.